The Galactic Assembly had ruled the stars for 12,000 cycles. 17 elder species sat on the Great Council, each one older than human civilization by millions of years. They had built ships that could bend space itself. Their weapons could crack moons in half. Their shields could swallow the fire of dying stars. They believed they had seen everything the universe could offer. Then humanity arrived. The day the human ship appeared at the edge of assembly space, every sensor station in 3 systems detected it. Not because it was powerful, not because it was fast. They detected it because it was so incredibly, almost painfully, slow. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of the HSS Perseverance and watched the stars through the main viewport. She was a small woman with gray streaks in her black hair and calm eyes that had seen too many battles. Behind her, the bridge crew worked at their stations in quiet efficiency. "We are being scanned," said Lieutenant from the tactical station. She was young, barely 30, but her voice carried no fear. 17 different frequencies. They are not being subtle about it. Admiral Park nodded. "Let them look, we have nothing to hide." This was not entirely true, but did not need to know that yet. The Perseverance moved through space at what the Assembly would later call the speed of a dying comet. While alien vessels flickered between stars and heartbeats, the human ship crawled forward like a wounded animal. Its engines burned with simple fusion fire. Its hull was thick gray metal, not the shimmering exotic matter that alien ships wore like jewelry. To the Galactic Assembly, it looked like a joke. Captain Lee entered the bridge from the rear corridor. He was tall for a human, with a face that rarely showed emotion and eyes that missed nothing. He had commanded the Perseverance for 6 years, and he knew every sound she made, every vibration in her bones. "The Assembly has sent a welcoming committee," he said, handing a data pad to Admiral Park. 12 warships. They say it is an honor guard." Park looked at the tactical display. 12 alien vessels surrounded the Perseverance in a perfect sphere. Each one was 3 times the size of the human ship. Each one glowed with weapons that could turn the Perseverance into dust in seconds. "An honor guard," Park repeated, "or a reminder of who holds the power here?" "Both, I think," said. The first meeting took place on the assembly station called the Nexus of Stars. It was a structure so large that it had its own gravity, a spinning wheel of crystal and light that housed representatives from every known species. Admiral Park led the human delegation through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Alien faces watched them pass. Some were curious, most were amused. She heard their whispers. "So small." Their ship took 9 days to cross the gap. 9 days. Our shuttles do it in minutes. Primitive creatures. They still burn fuel for propulsion. Park kept her face neutral. Beside her, Captain Lee walked with his hands clasped behind his back. If the whispers bothered him, he showed no sign. The assembly chamber was a vast dome filled with floating platforms. Each platform held a delegation from one of the elder species. At the center, raised above all others, sat the High Council. High Commander of the Dominion spoke first. He was humanoid in shape but towered 9 feet tall, with skin like polished bronze and 4 eyes that burned with cold intelligence. They were the most powerful military force in the assembly. They had never lost a war. "Humans," said, and his voice echoed through the chamber. "You have traveled far in your vessel. We welcome you to the community of civilized species." Laughter rippled through the chamber, quiet, polite, but impossible to miss. Park stepped forward. "The people of Earth thank the Assembly for this welcome. We come in peace, seeking friendship and mutual benefit." "Mutual benefit," repeated. He leaned forward on his platform. "Tell me, Admiral, what could humanity possibly offer the Assembly? Your ships are slow. Your weapons appear to be chemical-based. Your shields flicker with energy signatures we abandoned 10,000 cycles ago." More laughter, louder this time. Park did not flinch. We offer our perspective, our determination, our will to survive." "Charming," said, "but survival is not difficult when you have proper technology. Perhaps in a few thousand years, when your species has matured, you will have something of value to contribute." The meeting continued for hours. The assembly asked questions that were really insults. They offered trade agreements that were really chains. They smiled with too many teeth and promised friendship while their eyes measured the perseverance for weakness. Through it all, Captain Lee watched. He watched the way the ships moved, fast and confident. He watched the way their commanders laughed at human technology. He watched the way they assumed they understood everything about the slow gray ship that had crawled into their space. And he smiled just a little, where no one could see. That night in his quarters aboard the Perseverance, Lee spoke with Chief Engineer through a secure channel. "How is she holding?" Lee asked. His face appeared on the screen, tired but alert. He was older than Lee, with grease-stained hands and a mind that understood machines the way poets understood words. "The containment is stable," said, "but I do not like keeping her locked up this long. She wants to breathe." "She will breathe when the time is right," Lee said. "For now, let them laugh." "They laugh because they do not understand," said. "When they understand, they will not laugh anymore." Lee nodded slowly. "No, they will not." 6 months passed. Humanity established a small embassy on the nexus of stars. They traded simple goods, shared basic technology, and endured the constant mockery of the elder species. Admiral Park attended council meetings where her suggestions were ignored. She watched alien diplomats make deals that excluded humanity. She listened to speeches about the primitive newcomers who would need guidance to join galactic civilization. And every night, she reviewed the reports from Earth Command, reports that detailed the true nature of the Perseverance, reports that made her smile the same quiet smile that Captain Lee wore. The galaxy thought humans were slow. The galaxy thought humans were weak. The galaxy thought they understood what the Perseverance was. They were wrong about everything. And soon, very soon, they would learn the truth. But not yet. For now, Admiral Park waited. She had learned patience in the wars that shaped Earth. She had learned that sometimes the best weapon was the one your enemy did not believe existed. The Perseverance sat in its dock, gray and quiet and slow. And deep in its heart, something waited to be born. The warning came at midnight, station time. Lieutenant was alone on the bridge of the Perseverance when the alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed across every console. Emergency channels flooded with voices speaking in 100 alien languages, all of them saying the same thing. The head returned. His fingers flew across her console as she pulled up the tactical data. What she saw made her blood turn cold. The collective was a nightmare that the galaxy tried to forget. They were not a species in the normal sense. They were a hive mind, a single consciousness spread across millions of living ships. They did not conquer worlds. They consumed them. In the past 10,000 cycles, they had devoured 11 civilizations. Entire species had been erased from existence, their planets stripped bare, their people absorbed into the swarm. The assembly had pushed them back 3,000 cycles ago, but they had never destroyed them. They had retreated to the dark spaces between galaxies, waiting. Now they had stopped waiting. "Captain to the bridge," said into the comm system. "Captain Lee to the bridge immediately." Lee arrived within minutes, still pulling on his uniform jacket. Admiral Park followed seconds later, her gray hair loose around her shoulders. They stood together and watched the tactical display as it painted a picture of disaster. 10,000 bioships were pouring through a hole in space at the edge of the outer rim. Each ship was a living creature, grown from organic matter and armed with weapons that could adapt to any defense. They moved like a swarm of insects, fast and hungry and endless. The assembly was responding. 3,000 warships from 12 different species were racing to meet the threat. It was the largest fleet the galaxy had assembled in 1,000 cycles. It was not enough. "Open a channel to the Assembly Fleet Command," Park ordered. The face of High Commander appeared on screen. Even through the communication link, they could see the tension in his 4 eyes. There was afraid, though he tried to hide it. "Admiral Park," he said, "this channel is for military commanders only. Human observers should." "I am offering the Perseverance to join your defense," Park interrupted. "We can." Slav cut her off. It was sharp and bitter. "Your ship, your slow, primitive vessel," he shook his head. "The battle will be fought near the nebula. By the time your ship arrives, this will be over, one way or another." "Let us help," Park said. "We can." "You cannot help," said. "Your ship would arrive only to witness our victory or to collect our debris. Either way, you would be irrelevant." The channel closed. Captain Lee stood very still for a long moment. Then he turned to Admiral Park. "Orders." Park looked at the tactical display. 3,000 assembly ships were forming into attack formations. 10,000 dreadnoughts were spreading like a dark stain across the stars. "Take us to Nebula," she said. "Maximum speed." "That will take us 9 days," said. "The battle will be over in hours." "Then we had better leave now," Park replied. The Perseverance detached from its dock and began to move. Around it, alien ships flickered and vanished as they jumped to faster-than-light speeds. The human vessel crawled forward on its simple fusion engines, slow and steady and alone. In the engine room, Chief Engineer gathered his team. "You all know what we carry," he said. His voice was quiet, but every engineer heard him clearly. "For 6 months we have kept her asleep. Now it is time to wake her up." A young engineer named raised her hand. "Sir, if we begin the activation sequence now, we will be ready by the time we reach the nebula. But if something goes wrong—" "If something goes wrong, we become a very small star," said. "I know. But if those things reach the core worlds, there will be no one left to care about our small star." He placed his hand on the wall of the engine room. Somewhere beyond that wall, behind 17 layers of shielding, something waited. Something that should not exist. Something that humanity had built because they had no other choice. "Begin the sequence," said, "and pray we do not need to use her." 9 days passed. 9 days of watching distant battles through long-range sensors. 9 days of listening to desperate transmissions from the assembly fleet. 9 days of silence from High Commander. The news was bad. Then it was worse. Then it stopped being news and became a death sentence. Science Officer worked without sleep, monitoring every transmission, every sensor reading, every scrap of data that reached the Perseverance. She was a small woman with large eyes and a mind that could find patterns where others saw only chaos. "The assembly fleet engaged 3 days ago," she reported on day 7. "They lost 800 ships in the first hour." "Their weapons?" Lee asked. "Ineffective. The hulls adapt to energy frequencies within seconds. Phase cannons, plasma beams, graviton pulses, nothing works for long." Paused. "They tried nuclear weapons. They ate them." "Ate them?" "Their ships are organic. They absorb the radiation as food." Admiral Park closed her eyes. 800 ships, thousands of lives, and this was only the beginning. On day 8, they received a transmission from High Commander. His face was burned on one side. 3 of his 4 eyes were swollen shut. Behind him, his bridge was filled with smoke and emergency lights. "To any ships in range," said, his voice was broken. "The eternal dawn is without power. Our fleet is scattered. We have lost." He paused, struggling to continue. "We have lost 2,600 ships. They continue to advance. We request immediate assistance." The transmission ended. Looked at her console. "We are receiving similar distress calls from 47 assembly vessels. They are all that remains of the fleet." "Time to arrival at Nebula?" Lee asked. 14 hours. 14 hours. The Perseverance pushed forward through the darkness, its engines burning at maximum capacity. In the engine room, its team worked around the clock, preparing systems that had never been tested in combat. On the morning of Day 9, the Perseverance reached the nebula. What they found was worse than anything they had imagined. The nebula was filled with debris. Broken ships drifted in clouds of cooling metal and frozen atmosphere. Bodies floated in the void, members of species that had existed for millions of years, reduced to nothing. And beyond the debris, they waited. 8,000 bioships hung in space like a wall of living darkness. They pulsed with stolen energy, glowing with the life force of the civilizations they had consumed. Each ship was the size of a small moon, covered in organic weapons that looked like tumors and claws. 400 assembly ships huddled behind a dying moon, their shields flickering, their weapons silent. They were waiting to die. Admiral Park stood at the viewport and looked at the swarm. She had seen war. She had seen death. She had seen the worst that humanity could do to itself. This was different. This was not war. This was extinction. "Open a channel to the assembly survivors," she said. "All frequencies." When the channel opened, she spoke clearly and simply. "All vessels, this is Admiral Park of the HSS Perseverance. Fall behind us, now." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then High Commander's broken voice answered, "Fall behind you. Your slow ship cannot even." "Commander," Captain Lee said, stepping forward to the microphone. "In approximately 90 seconds, you will understand why humanity never needed fast ships." He cut the channel. The swarm began to move. 200 dreadnoughts detached from the main formation and surged toward the Perseverance. And deep in the engine room, whispered a prayer and pressed the final activation switch. Something woke up. Something hungry. Something that had been waiting to be born. The Perseverance did not run. Every ship that had ever faced had tried to run. Fast ships with powerful engines trying to escape the swarm. Quick ships with advanced drives jumping to safety. Smart ships with clever captains looking for any way out. The Perseverance simply stopped. On the bridge, Lieutenant watched her tactical display with growing confusion. "Captain, the Vanguard is closing fast. 200 ships. Time to contact 40 seconds. Captain Lee stood perfectly still at the center of the bridge. His hands were clasped behind his back. His face showed nothing. "Helm," he said, "all stop." The helmsman, a young man named, hesitated for just a moment. Then his training took over. "All stop, I." The Perseverance's engines fell silent. The great gray ship hung in space, motionless, waiting. Admiral Park moved to stand beside Lee. "Are we ready?" "Reports green across the board," Lee said. "We are as ready as we will ever be." In her quarters, Science Officer was monitoring the communication frequencies. What she heard made her breath catch in her throat. The hive mind communicated through a form of telepathy that created detectable energy patterns. For 3 days, those patterns had been confident, hungry, triumphant. The swarm had been singing a song of conquest. Now the song changed. "Captain," said over the comm, "something is happening to their neural link is showing unusual patterns. I have never seen anything like this." "Describe it," Lee said. "It is like," paused, searching for words. "It is like confusion. They are confused. The entire hive mind is experiencing something they do not understand." Through the viewport, the crew of the Perseverance could see the Vanguard slowing. 200 living ships, each one capable of destroying cities, had stopped their charge. They were hesitating. In 8,000 cycles of conquest, the collective had never hesitated. They had faced enemies with greater numbers. They had fought species with more advanced technology. They had devoured civilizations that had prepared for their arrival for centuries. None of that had stopped them. None of that had even slowed them down. But this slow gray ship, this primitive vessel that should have been easy prey, was doing something impossible. It was not afraid. High Commander watched from the broken bridge of the Eternal Dawn. His ship had no power, no weapons, no shields. He was drifting in the void, waiting for them to finish what they had started. Instead, he was watching the impossible. "What are they doing?" whispered his tactical officer, a young named Sira who had survived the battle with burns across half her body. "I do not know," admitted. It was the first time he had said those words in 100 cycles. The human ship had stopped, just stopped, in the middle of a battlefield surrounded by enemies with no chance of escape or victory, and somehow this act of apparent madness had caused them to pause. "Open a channel to the human vessel," ordered. "Commander, our communication systems are." "Find a way." It took precious minutes, but Sira managed to route power to a backup transmitter. When the channel opened, spoke through bleeding lips. "Human captain, what are you doing? Why have you stopped? You cannot fight them, you cannot defeat them. Your ship is." "Commander," Captain Lee's voice was calm, almost gentle. "With respect, you do not know what our ship is." "I know what I see. A slow vessel with primitive technology. You are committing suicide." "No," Lee said. "We are giving them a chance." "A chance to do what?" "To leave." Was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed, a painful sound that made his broken ribs scream. "You are insane. They do not leave. They do not retreat. They have never." "There is a first time for everything," Lee said. He cut the channel. On the Perseverance, weapons officer sat at his console with his hands hovering over the controls. He was young for his position, barely 35, but he had been chosen for this mission because he understood something that most people did not. He understood that some weapons should never be built, and he understood that sometimes you had to build them anyway. "Containment status," he said into his console. From the engine room's voice answered. "Stable. She is awake and she is hungry. The field is holding, but she knows we are here. She can feel the mass outside." Yes, so much mass, so much matter, she wants it." Closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were hard. "Keep her contained until the order comes." "I will try, but she is not happy. She has been asleep for too long. When she wakes up fully, she will want to feed." Admiral Park heard this exchange through the bridge speakers. She walked to the main viewport and looked out at the swarm. 8,000 ships, billions of tons of organic matter, enough mass to build a small planet. And somewhere in the heart of the Perseverance, something was hungry for all of it. "Admiral," said from her station, "they are reorganizing, they are spreading out." Park watched the tactical display. The Vanguard was forming a new pattern, a wide ring around the Perseverance. It was a formation they used when they suspected a trap but could not identify it. They had learned caution. After 8,000 cycles of conquest, they had finally found something that made them careful. And still, they did not leave. The hive mind was struggling with an impossible problem. Every instinct told them to attack. Every memory of past conquests said that victory was certain. But something about this gray ship, this impossibly slow vessel, was wrong. It should be running, it should be fighting, it should be doing something. Instead, it waited. The silence stretched. Minutes passed. They circled like predators around prey that refused to act like prey. Then, without warning, the pattern broke. 80 dreadnoughts surged forward, their biocannons charging with stolen energy. They had made their decision. Whatever the gray ship was, whatever trap it might hold, they would destroy it through overwhelming force. On the bridge of the Perseverance, alarms began to sound. 80 hostiles incoming, reported. Time to weapons range 30 seconds. Captain Lee did not move. "Admiral." Park watched the incoming ships. She thought about Earth. She thought about her brother, who had died in the wars that had torn their world apart. She thought about all the people who had worked and sacrificed to build the thing that waited in the heart of this ship. "The weapon is ready," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." Park turned to look at her crew, at tactical, at sensors, at the helm, at weapons, all of them young, all of them knowing what was about to happen. "We did not come here to die," she said. "We came here to end this." She turned to face the viewport. 80 dreadnoughts filled the screen, their organic hulls pulsing with power, their weapons glowing with killing light. She said, "Show them why humanity never needed to be fast." Weapons Officer entered a 7-digit code into his console. Deep in the ship, 17 layers of containment began to open. And something that should not exist took its first breath in 6 months. The Perseverance began to glow. The collective had a perfect memory. 8,000 cycles of conquest were stored in the hive mind, every battle preserved, every victory remembered. When they faced a new enemy, they could draw upon the experiences of billions of past encounters. They knew how ships moved. They knew how weapons worked. They knew how species died. This knowledge made them unstoppable. And now, for the first time, this knowledge was failing them. The 80 dreadnoughts that had charged toward the Perseverance suddenly slowed. The commanders of those ships, if they could be called commanders, felt something through the hive mind that none of them understood. The gray ship was changing. Science Officer watched her sensors with wide eyes. "Captain, I am detecting an energy signature I cannot identify. It is coming from inside our ship, from below decks." "That is correct," Captain Lee said calmly. "Sir, this energy reading does not make sense. The numbers are wrong, they are too big. They are—" She stopped, checked her instruments, and checked them again. "Sir, my sensors must be broken." "Your sensors are working perfectly," Admiral Park said. "What you are seeing is real." Looked at the Admiral, then back at her console. "Admiral, if these readings are correct, we have something on board that is bending space-time just by existing. The mass readings suggest something with the density of a collapsed star." "Close," Park said, "but not quite." The felt it too. Across the hive mind, a wave of sensation passed like fire through dry grass. Every ship in the swarm, all 8,000 of them, suddenly became aware of something impossible, something that existed at the heart of the gray ship that they had been ready to destroy. It was not a weapon in any sense they understood. Weapons were things that projected energy, fired projectiles, created destruction at a distance. This was different. This was a hunger. The hive mind had consumed 11 civilizations. They had absorbed trillions of lives, swallowed entire planets, drunk the energy of stars. They knew what hunger felt like. And now, for the first time in their existence, they felt something hungrier than themselves. On the bridge of the Perseverance spoke quietly into his console. "Containment at 50%. She is waking up." "How long until full activation?" Lee asked. 3 minutes, maybe less. She is eager." The dreadnoughts had stopped completely now. They hung in space, massive organic structures that had never known fear, and they trembled. The hive mind was screaming. High Commander had managed to restore partial power to the Eternal Dawn sensors. What those sensors showed him made no sense. The human ship, that slow gray vessel he had mocked for 6 months, was glowing with an energy field that his instruments could not measure. "What is that?" Sierra whispered beside him. Did not answer. He was watching the formation, waiting for them to attack, waiting for them to swarm the human ship and tear it apart. But they were not attacking. They were spreading out, pulling back, creating distance between themselves and the Perseverance. They were afraid. "Impossible," said. "They do not fear anything. They cannot fear. Their hive mind does not process that emotion." "Then what are they doing?" Sierra asked. "They are hesitating." The word felt wrong in his mouth. They did not hesitate. In 3,000 cycles of conflict, he had never seen them pause, never seen them doubt, never seen them do anything except advance and consume. And yet here they were, pulling back from a single ship, a slow ship, a ship they should have destroyed in seconds. What did the humans build? In the engine room of the Perseverance, Chief Engineer stood at the edge of the containment field and watched something beautiful and terrible come to life. The humans had called it the Consequence. It was not a bomb. It was not a cannon. It was not any kind of weapon that had ever existed before. It was a singularity. But not a black hole. Black holes were simple things, gravity wells that pulled everything toward a center point. Humanity could not control a black hole. No one could. This was something else, something worse. A naked singularity. A point of infinite density without an event horizon. A tear in the fabric of spacetime that should not be able to exist, but did, because human scientists had spent 40 years figuring out how to make it exist. And more importantly, how to aim it. "She is at 70%, said into his comm. "The field is holding, barely." "Can you hold her for 3 more minutes?" asked. Looked at the containment readings. The singularity was pulling at the walls of its prison, distorting space itself with its impossible mass. The containment field was designed to hold it, but it was never meant to hold it while it was fully awake. "I will hold her," said. "Just tell me when to let go." The hive mind was in chaos. For the first time in 8,000 cycles, the collective could not agree on what to do. Part of the swarm wanted to attack, to overwhelm the strange ship with numbers and destroy whatever it carried. Part of the swarm wanted to flee, to retreat to the dark spaces between galaxies and never return. And part of the swarm, a small part that had grown over 3 minutes of hesitation, wanted to understand. What had the humans built? How had this slow species, this primitive race that still burned fuel for propulsion, created something that made the collective afraid? The answer came through the hive mind like a whisper. It came from the oldest memories, from the first cycles of the collective's existence, before they became conquerors, before they became hungry. It was a warning. Long ago, before they became what they were, they had been different. They had been a species like any other, living on a world, building a civilization, reaching for the stars. Then they had found something, something in the deep void between galaxies, something that should not have existed. They had tried to use it, tried to harness it, tried to make it a weapon. And it had changed them, transformed them, made them into what they were now, hungry and endless and unable to stop consuming. They were not conquerors by choice. They were addicts, slaves to a hunger that had been burned into their DNA by contact with something they did not understand. And now, impossibly, the humans had built their own version of that something. "Captain," said, her voice shaking, "the communication frequencies are going crazy. They are arguing. I did not know they could argue." "What are they saying?" Park asked. Listened, her translator working to make sense of the alien signals. "Half of them want to attack. They say the hunger is too strong, they cannot resist. The other half want to run. They say this ship carries." She paused. "They say this ship carries the first hunger, the thing that made them what they are." "They are half right," Park said quietly. "We carry something like it, something that we built ourselves." The 3 minutes passed. Across the battlefield, 80 dreadnoughts that had charged toward the Perseverance finally made their decision. They could not run. The hunger would not let them. They could not surrender. They did not know how. They could only attack. The swarm surged forward again, biocannons firing, organic missiles launching, a wall of living destruction aimed at the heart of the gray ship. On the bridge, looked at Admiral Park. His finger hovered over a single key. "Full activation," Park said. "Fire." "Press the key." And in the engine room, finally let go. The containment field opened. The Consequence took its first bite. And the universe screamed. The light came first. Not light in the normal sense. Not photons traveling through space at the speed the universe allowed. This was something else. This was light that bent around itself, folded through dimensions, reached into places that had no name. Watched his console as the consequence opened its eyes. For 6 months, humanity's greatest secret had slept in the heart of the Perseverance, wrapped in containment fields that warped spacetime just to hold it still. It had dreamed of mass, of matter, of the endless feast that waited in the universe outside. Now it was awake. And it was hungry. The beam that emerged from the Perseverance was not made of energy. It was not made of particles. It was made of gravity itself, focused and directed and compressed into a line of force that should not have been possible. It touched the first dreadnought, and the ship simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no fire, no debris. The organic vessel, 2 kilometers of living matter and stolen energy, unraveled. Every atom in its structure was pulled toward a point that existed everywhere and nowhere, stretched and compressed, and scattered across dimensions that human mathematics could barely describe. The process took 0.7 seconds. Then the beam swept sideways. Admiral Park stood at the viewport and watched as the consequence did what it was designed to do. She had read the reports. She had seen the simulations. She had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. Nothing had prepared her for the reality. The beam moved through the vanguard like a scythe through wheat. It did not burn them, did not vaporize them, did not destroy them in any way that made sense to conventional physics. It simply erased them. 80 dreadnoughts became nothing in 1.3 seconds. The beam continued, reaching deeper into the formation, touching ship after ship after ship. 300 more dissolved. The hive mind screamed. It was not a sound that could be heard in the vacuum of space. It was something else, a telepathic howl of agony and terror that broadcast across every frequency the universe knew. 7 species in the assembly were sensitive to such things. All of them felt it. On 12 different worlds, beings with telepathic abilities collapsed, their minds burned by this dying thoughts. Ships lost control as their crews were overwhelmed by psychic shock. Medical bays across the galaxy filled with people who had suddenly started screaming for no reason. And still, the Perseverance did not stop firing. Lieutenant had never been religious. She had never believed in gods or devils or cosmic forces beyond understanding. Now, watching the tactical display, she started to understand why ancient humans had invented such beings. The consequence was not a weapon. It was a force of nature. It was gravity and hunger and the end of all things, compressed into a beam that humanity had somehow learned to aim. 1,200 hostile contacts eliminated, she reported, her voice barely steady. The formation is breaking up. Do not stop, Park said. The beam swept again. Chief Engineer stood in the engine room, watching the containment readings climb toward red. The consequence was feeding now, drawing energy from everything it touched, growing stronger with each ship it consumed. Admiral, he said into the comm, we are approaching critical. She is eating too fast. The containment fields cannot hold much longer. How long? 4 minutes, maybe 5. That will be enough, Park said. Keep her stable. Looked at the readings. The singularity at the heart of his ship was pulsing with stolen mass, growing denser with every second. It wanted more. It always wanted more. I will try, he said. High Commander watched from the eternal dawn, as humanity showed the galaxy its true face. He had lived for 300 cycles. He had commanded fleets that conquered star systems. He had faced thee in battle 4 times and survived each encounter through skill and luck and sheer determination. He had never seen anything like this. The Perseverance hung in space, motionless, while a beam of impossible light swept through the swarm. Each pass erased hundreds of ships. Each sweep cut deeper into the enemy formation. They were trying to flee now. After 8,000 cycles of conquest, after devouring 11 civilizations, after never knowing defeat, they were running. But the consequence was faster than running. Sir, Sira whispered beside him, "What is that thing?" Could not answer. He did not have words for what he was seeing. The humans had built a god killer. They had taken something that should not exist and forged it into a weapon that unmade matter itself. And they had hidden it in a slow gray ship that the galaxy had laughed at for 6 months. They knew, said finally. They knew from the beginning. They let us mock them. They let us dismiss them. And all along they carried that thing in their ship. Why, Sira asked, why hide it? Because they hoped they would never have to use it. The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted 7 minutes. When the consequence finally stopped firing, when the beam faded and the light died, the tactical display told a story that would be remembered for 10,000 cycles. Of the 8,000 dreadnoughts that had invaded assembly space, 6,247 had ceased to exist, not destroyed, not defeated, erased as if they had never been. The remaining 1,753 ships fled. They did not retreat in formation. They did not regroup for another attack. They scattered into hyperspace, running in every direction at once, desperate to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the gray ship. And as they fled, they broadcast a message, a single warning that echoed across every frequency they could use. Do not pursue, do not engage, forget this region, forget these creatures. In the language of the hive mind, it was something more. It was a prayer, a desperate hope that if they ran far enough, fast enough, the humans would not follow. The universe fell silent. On the bridge of the Perseverance, Admiral Park lowered herself into her command chair. Her legs were shaking. Her hands trembled. She had commanded ships in war for 30 years, but she had never done anything like this. Damage report, she said. Hull integrity at 97%, said. Minor stress fractures in sections 12 through 15. No casualties. The weapon. Checked his console. The consequence is returning to dormant state. Containment is holding at acceptable levels. Park nodded slowly. Chief engineer status. His voice came through the comm, tired but steady. She is going back to sleep. She does not want to, but the containment is holding. We will need full maintenance when we return to Earth. The field generators are burned out. How long before we can fire again? A pause if we push it. 72 hours, but I would not recommend pushing it. Understood. Park looked around her bridge. Her crew was silent, staring at their consoles, trying to process what they had just done. In 7 minutes, they had killed more beings than had died in all of Earth's wars combined. They had ended a threat that had terrorized the galaxy for 8,000 cycles. They had shown the universe what humanity could do when it had no other choice. And they had done it with a ship that everyone had called slow. Captain Lee stepped forward. Admiral, High Commander is requesting communication. Park straightened in her chair, put him through. His face appeared on the screen. He looked different now. The arrogance was gone. The mockery was gone. What remained was something that might have been respect or might have been fear. Admiral Park, he said, on behalf of the Galactic Assembly, he stopped, struggling for words. I have no words for what I have just witnessed. There are no words, Park said simply. There is only what was necessary. What was that weapon? Park considered the question. Then she shook her head. That is a discussion for another time. For now, Commander, they are retreating. The threat is over. The threat is over, repeated. He sounded like a man who did not quite believe what he was saying. Because of you, because of your slow ship. We are not as slow as we look, Park said. A ghost of a smile crossed his burned face. No, you are not. The channel closed. Admiral Park sat alone on her bridge, surrounded by her crew, and she thought about the weapon in the heart of her ship. Humanity had built the consequence because they had no other choice. They could not outrun the universe. They could not outfight it with conventional weapons. They could not make alliances fast enough to protect themselves. So they had built something that could end threats permanently. It was a terrible thing, a beautiful thing, a weapon that should never be used. And yet, when it was needed, it was there. Park looked out at the stars and wondered if the galaxy would ever forgive them for what they had done. Then she decided that forgiveness did not matter. What mattered was survival. And humanity, slow and stubborn and impossible, had survived.